Coming up on today's Locked On Bucks, we recap the month of November, a very successful month for the Bucks. They wrapped it up with a win that went down to the wire against the Washington Wizards. We'll take a look back at that and what else went right for the Bucks in this month. Coming up next here on Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Bucks. I'm Justin Garcia, joined as always by Camille Davis. We thank you for making Locked On Bucks your first listen of the day each and every day. And as a reminder, we now have a podcast or a newsletter, as well as we introduce the Locked On Bucks daily newsletter, the one stop for ultimate team and league coverage, delivered right to your inbox. Sign up now for free at lockedondaily.com. That is lockedondaily.com to start your day with the all-new free Locked On Bucks newsletter. Today's episode of Locked On Bucks is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet and get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Camille, as we mentioned, November comes to an end for the Bucks. A very successful month, especially considering where things stood when we came into this month. But it didn't wrap up without, not concern, but a test in the form of the Washington Wizards. And this game, I felt, was always going to be interesting because it had the makings of a trap game.
Yep.
With a Wizards team that now goes 0 in the month of November, and a Bucks team that was playing very well coming into it. You also look ahead to this upcoming week here and say, okay, the games after this game, they have a winner-take-all NBA Cup game we'll touch on a little bit later today with the Detroit Pistons. Then you have a back-to-back against the Atlanta Hawks, who have already clinched a spot in the quarterfinals of the NBA Cup or the knockout round. And then you have the Boston Celtics. So it would have been very easy to look past this game. Maybe that's some of what we saw. Maybe it was the tryptophan and a Thanksgiving hangover for this Bucks team. Maybe it was rust, too, with all those days off. But it was, I thought, I hesitate to use the word impressive. What was impressive was I don't think this is a game that the Bucks win last year, and it's probably not a game they win in early November or in October.
I mean, think about the last time the Bucks played the Wizards to end last season in April, where the Wizards had so many guys out and the Bucks tricked that game off. And it was like a string of games for that Bucks team against opponents that they should have beaten and end up losing in embarrassing fashion. So to your point about this being a game that they probably wouldn't have won earlier this season, I couldn't agree more. I heard Doc Rivers in his post-game presser say the exact same thing as well, of like, this is a game that I think earlier in the season we would have lost. And even Giannis, when asked about this, was like, yeah, it doesn't matter if it looks pretty or not. Like, and if we're playing well, we have to figure out how to win the game. And he's mentioned that he was saying that throughout the fourth quarter of like, just win the game, find a way. Like afterwards, we can look at the film and figure things out and we can move forward, but find a way to win the game. And they did that against a Wizards team that had a Jordan Poole that was feeling good to be back home in Milwaukee, it looked like, as well as a Malcolm Brogdon, who had a season high against the Bucks, looking pretty good in a building that he's somewhat familiar with as well. So, yeah, I wouldn't say it was a good win or an impressive win, but it was a necessary win for the Bucks. They did what they had to do, and I think it shows some growth in this team this season because, as mentioned, not sure if they would have got this win earlier on this year.
Yeah, and that game last year that you referenced, it came, it was in their final 10 games. It was very, very late. But, you know, it wasn't just the Giannis injury. That certainly torpedoed a lot. But remember when they beat the Oklahoma City Thunder convincingly at home was when a lot of the optimism was really starting to reemerge with the way they were playing around then. And just looking back and saying, okay, I think they're starting to piece it together. I think that was either part of a win streak where they had won 4 out of 5 or 5 out of 6 or something along those lines. And the Thunder was certainly the most impressive win in that mix. And then they closed out the rest of the year, I think 3-8 the rest of the way. Granted, Giannis missed the last, 4 or 5 regular season games. But this Wizards game was not one of those. You had
Yeah,
Giannis, you had Chris Middleton, you didn't have Damian Lillard in that game. But it just, the stakes of everything and what the Bucks were trying to hunt down last year, and looking at a schedule where you had a lot of favorable matchups to close out the year, and you just limped along. And that is really one of those defining games, really, about what this group was last season. When you look at who was on the floor for the Wizards that you mentioned, who was on the floor for the Bucks, and just how things were going, that kind of summed up everything that we saw. So to me, it was just as important to say, we're not the team that we were last year. This is a much different version here.
and with that being said, looking at Dame and Giannis, like they're finding a really good groove on the court. And I thought that this game against the Wizards, you saw that as well. Saw the stat that's been floating around about the fact that last night against the Wizards was the third time that Giannis and Dame each had at least 25 points and 10 assists in the same game as teammates, which is the most in NBA history. I was like, wait, what?
Yeah.
Or at
Well,
least since the merger,
and Giannis's 40-point triple-double too. Like,
the first of his career.
I looked it up and had to look it up again and think this is one of those glitches with StatHead where I must have entered something wrong. Of this is the first time he's had a 40-point triple-double.
Yeah, it felt like he would have done that already, but nope. Giannis is still finding new ways to impress and just show how deep the bag is for his game. And with Dame and Giannis having a game like this, where again they both have 10 assists, I think that's the piece of it that I love. We've talked about it before, but when they can get their teammates involved, get everybody feeling like they're part of the win, part of the game, touching the ball, getting that energy, the offense just flows so much better when they can use their gravity to set up things for their teammates.
And that's a huge, huge piece of it. I know there's a pieces coming out on Damian Lillard here in the coming days, and just how important his offense has been for this team. And when you use that terminology of his offense, I think all of us kind of think about scoring and Dame's 3-point shooting, but the whole package is what we've seen from him this year, and the importance of his passing ability and those assist numbers that you pointed to. What jumps out to me about Dame, and we're going to spend a decent chunk of time talking about Giannis because it is certainly warranted. I saw you retweeting what Kevin O'Connor had pointed out earlier in the day as well. But we're going to get to the Giannis piece. But for Dame, one of the things that stood out the most to me is the efficiency numbers have not been, I think, what he anticipated, what any of us anticipated. I think we've started to see an uptick here in the past couple of games. But knowing those shooting percentages are what they are, he has 7 30-point games already this season out of, I believe he's played 18. That's another one of those things of, I can't believe that to be true. And I think that's a good thing because it shows, look, he can still get to the free throw line. And even when the shot isn't falling, he can still get to the rim. And I talked about this, I think last week, that the eye test would tell you he's getting to the rim and finishing at the rim more this year than he was last year. The numbers don't back that up. It's still a lesser percentage of his shots, and he's not hitting quite as high of a percentage at those shots at the rim than it was a year ago. But I do think a big piece of that is Dame, the facilitator that we've seen, and just getting those paint touches and kicking it out after the defense reacts. I mean, looking at your percentage of shots and what you're shooting there, that's not going to account for that. And I think that's a big chunk of what we've seen from him.
It is. And something that Doc has said a few times that's been sticking out to me and thinking about it. I think every game that Dame's had at least 10 assists, the Bucks have won. I need to double check, but I feel like they've won every game where he's had at least 10 assists. And Doc has mentioned Dame hasn't been in a situation like this where he's had teammates like the ones that he has on the Milwaukee Bucks. He's never played with a Giannis. And we've talked about how Giannis has never had a Dame either. But for Dame and making that adjustment as the point guard and really being like, okay, I'm going to use this to really set up my teammates and use my gravity to get them going. And I'm going to pick my spots because I know that I can get going and I know I can score in a hurry real quick. And if it's a game where there's no Giannis or no Chris or whatever the situation might call, like we saw in Miami, Dame's very comfortable stepping back into that, okay, I can be the focal point of the offense. I can get everything going offensively here this way as well. But if I do have my help out there, I don't mind setting my guys up. I don't mind being the point guard. And I love seeing that from Dame because his playmaking ability paired with Giannis's playmaking ability can make the Bucks really hard to stop. Like I think Doc said it as well, where it's like it's hard to stop a passer who can score because they're always going to be looking for the best play every single time up and down the court.
5 double-doubles. The Bucks are 5-0 in the games where Dame has had 10 or more assists this season. And he's a plus 38 in his minutes played in those 5 games as well. And the splits, the percentages of his 30-point games are even better. There's 2 games he missed that I was not accounting for. So 7 of his 16 games, basically half of the games he's played in, he has scored 30 or more points. And look, it's easy to start to get swept away in envisioning a world where this continues to click and get better, and then you sprinkle in a third name as well, which we'll get to that conversation in just a little bit on today's show. But coming up after the break here, I do want to get into the Giannis discussion, some things that you mentioned that I mentioned, you pointed out of Kevin O'Connor's piece on Twitter as well, and just taking a step back to recognize the numbers that Giannis has put up so far in not only the month of November, but this season as a whole. We'll get into that conversation coming up next year on Locked On Bucks. This next segment of Locked On Bucks is sponsored by BetterHelp. And look, it's the holiday season. It brings out happy times for all of us. You get time away from work. You get to spend some time with your loved ones and family. It's the cozy time of year as well. But this time of year can also bring some stresses and other triggers that you may not have throughout other courses of the season. And therapy is a great way to bring yourself some comfort that never goes away, even when the season changes. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It is entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. All you have to do to get started is fill out a brief questionnaire. From there, you get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can even switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Find comfort this December with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. Well, Camille, if I had to sum it up for Giannis in a word here, it's been incredible. I mean, Doc Rivers talked about this after the win over the Wizards and said, look, I haven't been here long, but this is clearly the best he has been since I've been here. He's been remarkable, all the things that he's done. Last year we spent so much time talking about, man, he's averaging better than 30 points and doing it efficiently, shooting 60%. No one has ever done that. He's kept that efficiency this season. We've talked about adding the mid-range shot and the importance there. You go back to that game against the Charlotte Hornets too, where he took 3 straight mid-range shots and did them differently, that Grant Williams had to react and give different reactions each time, and the things that's going to open up for him. He's gotten better at that kind of hook push shot on Saturday night. He even pulled out a Magic Johnson-esque sky hook at one point against the Wizards. So he's using those, but to me, his passing has just been incredible this season. And I don't think his passing has been bad in any of the last, really since his MVP season, but it has gotten better each year. We talked about Giannis always improves statistically every single year to the next year, the first, 7 or 8 years of his career. And the passing to me is the thing now that has been markedly improved year in, year out. There was that play last night where I don't know how he found him, but he finds Taurean Prince Saturday night to hit the 3-pointer that basically clinched the game and said, okay, we're going to win this. Another play where he was attacking, driving, and on a fast break, brings the ball down to his knees, looks like he's going to wind and dunk it and wrap around pass. Those things, and just how good he's gotten at the dribble handoff too, and how much ball control he has with it, where he just sets the screen and palms the ball and holds it out there and waits to see something open and find somebody. His passing, to me, deserves a lot of attention this season.
I'm so glad you brought up that pass that he had to Torian Prince in the corner where he scooped it around, because that
And it looked like
pass
he
to
had
me when I
nothing.
saw like it looked like the Dr. J baseline scoop layup, but
Yeah,
Giannis went the other way and then scooped it back around to pass to the corner. It was ridiculous. Like, listen, Frank, if you're listening, I know you have your thread of like the Giannis dimes that have been impressive. That one needs to be
that's
on
up
the
there.
list. That one had me just go wow out loud when I saw it. So absolutely on all your points about his passing.
Well, and even before you get back to your point, the the whip around passes,
Yeah.
they're it just like we take it for granted that he makes the pass and it hits its target. I mean, when he first started bringing those out, those things were going into the stands.
Or James Harden's face. He had a couple, he had that one that went into Harden's face too, but he's always been a willing passer. And we've made the jokes as well of like he has to lead the league in like near triple doubles with how
Yeah.
many times he's gotten to those 8 or 9 assists, and then teammates couldn't cash it in for him. But yeah, his growth as a passer has been amazing. And I love Doc pointing out that he's trying to get Giannis's next step to be becoming that playmaker from the elbow, and stop having Giannis try to operate out of the post as much when trying to find his teammates, and just how that subtle positioning can make so much of a difference. Because from the elbow, one, it's harder to trap and double at the elbow just based on where you are on the court. And also on top of that too, you can see the court a bit better than you can from the post when those doubles do try to come or people are trying to trap you or put pressure on you. So just seeing how Giannis can continue to evolve his game. Like, again, been a willing passer, but like, can you stop now, learn to pass from this area of the court and start seeing things a bit differently for your teammates? So I love that aspect of it. In addition to his playmaking, I feel like the defensive effort from Giannis has really been there, especially like the last few weeks for him. Just being a demon on getting the blocks, the steals, just being active. They've even been sending him on some of like those really high hedges where he's coming out really quickly to just try to put some pressure on the ball
Yeah.
handler. So all the different ways they're using Giannis defensively, like he's just been doing it all, which is again why I'm going to get my early MVP train rolling for Giannis, because he's playing at a real MVP level for this Milwaukee Bucks team. And he's a big part of the reason for this November turnaround that they have had so far.
His defense has been great, and there was what, 3 of those instances in the Wizards game too, where he was out there blitzing and trying to cause a turnover where they clearly saw something on film and also knew like we can gamble against this Wizards offense, so let's do it. But you think about already, you talk about the thread that Frank keeps of Giannis's passes. We could start a thread of his individual defensive plays this season alone that he's made, and they've been in key spots of the game. But I'm glad that you brought up Doc's comments after the game too about the next evolution for Giannis, because I think we've seen a decent chunk of this so far. But to Doc's point, this is what we want to be the norm for Giannis. And his quote was, he's making all the right plays. We knew we had a great matchup for him. And frankly, there's 24 great matchups for Giannis, but we're just trying to get him to keep seeing the floor from the elbow, because from there you can see everything. You can see the help coming, and then you're still only one dribble and a step to the basket. If you're Giannis from the post, it's just easier to double team you, and you can't see some of those things. So we want him to keep working from the elbow was what Doc started that conversation with. And I think we've largely seen that this season. We still see some post touches from Giannis, but a lot of this has been elbow based. I mean, most of those mid-range jumpers that we're talking about, they're coming from the nail and right around the free throw line. The baby hooks too, and things of that nature. It's coming from that same spot. He's not getting into the post as much as he did. And to Doc's point, and I know others, everydayers especially, people have been banging this drum for a while. And especially when you go up against teams like the Heat and back in the day, the Toronto Raptors, that have those schemes built of, man, they are already constructing defenses to give you fits. But when you do that, it's just so much easier. And that to me has been one of the big boosts from Giannis this season and for this Bucks offense that's, quietly still not where it needs to be, but chugging along and right there near the top 10 now.
Yeah, chugging along. And to your point about just how they've been using Giannis, something else that made me happy to see in the Wizards game is just how they've been utilizing AJ Green offensively, seeing some more of those, pick and roll situations with AJ Green and Giannis. And we've talked about guards in the past that have been really good at hitting those inverted pick and rolls with Giannis and how valuable that can be for him. We talked about Wesley Matthews doing it well, Pat Connaughton, especially during the championship run and what they were able to accomplish with that. And now seeing AJ Green get into that mix, I love seeing him in that, given how much of a threat he is from three and how much teams have to respect that and what that does when he's in those two-man actions with Giannis. And I saw they asked him after the game, and AJ was like, listen, if we can get Giannis an easy layup, because I'm doing it, like, I'm here for it. Like, that's what I want. We want easy buckets. So seeing AJ Green is like that next guard in Bucks lore of doing these actions with Giannis is really fun to see, especially too when you have a Pat Connaughton still on the team on the bench who can kind of talk you through some of those angles when you're watching film and coach you up as well as somebody who's been out there and doing it as well.
Yeah, and I mean that's been a huge play for the Bucks through the years where
Yeah.
you do the inverted pick and roll. Pat Connaughton too, the play that you're speaking of, and I think we've seen AJ do it once, where you set the pick that seals and allows Giannis to just get right to the lane. Pat's the best on the team at it, but we've seen some of that from AJ and just that inverted screening where you all of a sudden have the decision of, do we leave this guy open who's been, red hot shooting the ball from the outside and take both of our guys in the action and just trail Giannis here and give AJ Green that open look? Like, that is something you're not going to get in those Pat Connaughton actions because everybody's going to say, yeah, we're putting both of them on Pat Connaughton and we'll let him take the shot. So the more of stuff like that, the more it's going to be difficult to really get a handle on this offense for opposing defenses. And even that two-man game with he and Damian Lillard. We've seen some of those actions along the baseline on the short rolls, and Dame is certainly more comfortable with him. I've mentioned jokingly, hey, we finally have somebody else that can throw some lobs to Giannis. We did see Ajax try to throw one
A little
to
too
him
much.
in the Wizards game, and I think Giannis had to tell him, dude, I'm not your age. You got to bring that one down just a little bit.
A little too high. Yeah, that was one for Ajax where I was like, I don't know who you thought was going to go grab that one. When you throw a lob that's out of reach for Giannis, like you threw it a little too far on that one. But the chemistry is still developing. And really quick before we head into the next segment, since you brought up Andre Jackson Jr. as well, watching his growth, like him trying to figure it out offensively. He didn't have a great shooting game against the Wizards, but he was taking some shots. Enjoy like the layup he got off a short roll. I think it was a Bobby Portis offensive rebound. Ajax is waiting for, like, just let me get the ball real quick, kicks it to him. It's a quick layup for him. And just seem to get comfortable. And that's one of the things too with like younger players. Like, this is a game where AJ Green fouled out, a little bit too much body, not moving the speed enough in certain actions. And for Andre, where it's like offensively of trying to figure it out. And that's the part of having young players too, where you're going to get games like this where they're figuring it out in real time. So you have to live with those growing pains. But I love Andre taking the initiative of being like, I'm gonna throw this up, because we've seen him do it a few times so far this season as well. It's just that Wizards game a little too much on it.
Just a touch too much there from Ajax on that one, but still almost Giannis almost was able to throw that one down. We mentioned November has been a pretty successful month for the Bucks. So we'll take a look at some of the closing month numbers for this group and a very interesting week for the Bucks here. NBA group play, your finale against the Pistons, a couple of other big showdowns on this schedule. We'll get into that conversation and wrap up the show next on Locked On Bucks. Time to talk to you now about our friends over at FanDuel. We can all get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more, all on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right. I suppose let's rip off the Band-Aid and just the disappointment. Chris Middleton did not make his return to the floor.
Mm.
Who knows when it's coming? And I think Doc Rivers has joked several times. It's close. I know you're getting sick of hearing it. I'm getting sick of saying it. But I think the important part is that the team is starting to gel and figure things out in the interim, because one of the things that you kind of dreaded that you and I talked about earlier in the season was, man, especially at 2-8, I don't really want the situation where this team is struggling and Chris Middleton is coming back expected to be the savior.
Yeah, that changes the mathematics a bit when things are still going wrong. Like if this team hadn't righted the ship and now was the game over 500, if they were, 3 games under 500 or 4 games, like the pressure on Chris Middleton's return would be so much greater. And we've talked about this before the season even started, when it was originally announced that he was hurt. And it's like our worry levels about it, where it's like he is an important piece to this team. Let's not get it twisted. Chris is important. And you even heard Doc talk about the fact that Dame and Giannis's minutes should look a bit more in line of what they're hoping to once Chris comes back, because he helps with the rotations and immensely. But again, he is like a third option on this team, which I think changes the mathematics for the team as well, because he's coming in as somebody who isn't a star. Like this situation where it was just Giannis and Chris, and now he's coming back and integrating him back into the system. The pressure on him is so much greater. But luckily, this team has been able to put together some wins, find some chemistry, find a bit of a rotation as well. And then Chris can be able to come back into that, not necessarily needing to be a savior, but just somebody who's going to need to figure out how to play with how they're looking to do so in their system. And like I said before, I do think we might get a little bit of clunkiness for the first week or two with Chris coming back in, especially with how much read and react actions the Bucks love to do offensively, where it's just based off of feel and where guys are, and how they feel like the game should be flowing. So I think it might be a little clunky for him to begin with, but I think defensively the IQ is there. And we've been seeing this team start to get it defensively as well. Like we talked about the numbers, but the eye test is also showing you that guys just seem to understand where the help is supposed to come from now. And they're playing a bit faster when they do have to get in those situations. So for Chris's return, it's not only going to be the offensive piece, but also getting used to the new defensive schemes and not falling back on the habits that he's had from playing with these guys for the last few years.
Yeah, and it's interesting that depending on where you go for your numbers, so cleaning the glass, as I'm sure all the everydayers are familiar with, we've referenced it quite a bit. But cleaning the glass takes out the garbage time. NBA.com's numbers are just accounting for all of it. If we look at NBA.com's numbers, and I joked about this with Marcus Johnson too, that depending on which is better, that kind of formulates which one am I going to go with for numbers that we reference on a broadcast. But NBA.com, their numbers, the Bucks have the 9th best defense in the league during the month of November, and at 111.3. And they 11th, but 111.3. They're essentially tied with the Timberwolves, Warriors, and Heat. So you've basically been a top 10 defense in the league during November. Offensively, 115.4 for the Bucks, which is 9th best in the league, and their net rating is 9th best. When you look at cleaning the glass and taking out some garbage time, and the Bucks have actually, again, part of this is the turnaround, had a decent amount of that of late. The offense has been pretty consistent, as the Bucks have put up the 10th best offense in the league, removing garbage time, but they're 19th in defense and 22nd in net rating. So part of that is, hey, the defense has taken advantage in some of those spots. But your larger point about the eye test, I think, is the most important one, in that, I couldn't tell you. The Wizards game, honestly, was probably the first time in quite some time that you I'm not going to say felt like last year, but where it started to become, okay, why is this team getting into the paint so much? I mean, really, the Bulls game earlier in the year was the other game that you would point to and say, what is happening here? But the Wizards were able to do it quite a bit. Malcolm Brogdon's just good at that. I mean, we saw it here firsthand when he was with the Bucks. He just has more athleticism and quickness than you would imagine. He's got great strength as well. We all can remember some famous Malcolm Brogdon plays at the rim during his time, that dunk over LeBron James.
Yeah.
So it's something that Malcolm Brogdon does well. And, Doc Rivers talked about that too, in that he and Jordan Poole, the guys that are shifty, can give AJ Green some problems. And that's probably on us that we made that a part of the assignments. But just the way this group has looked, I mean, we're talking about one game since the second game of the year where you would say, what is going on here? That in itself is quite an accomplishment given where we were starting a year ago.
Yeah, they don't look completely lost anymore, or you don't see as many situations where the guys putting their hands up and looking at each other like, wait, what? What happened? Like, where were you at? You're seeing more hand motion on defense where guys are talking, communicating. You're seeing them point out assignments on a switch, saying like, you're going this way, I'm staying here. Communication looks like it's getting a lot better for these guys too along the way. So again, positive progress for them to hear what was happening in the month of November with how the numbers have racked up for them, being top 10 offense, top 10 defense. Some might look at that and be like, I think it's a lot of different things. You can look at the fact that it's been a heavy home schedule for the Bucks in the month of November. You can look at the competition level that they are played against over the last few weeks in particular for this team as a reason to why. And you can also look at the process and say like they're understanding what they need to be doing a bit better, and they're starting to click and understand how they need to be playing the game of basketball. And I honestly think it's a bit of all three, where it's like all these factors contribute to the November that the Bucks had, where they went 9-5 in the month of November. And I think, like, again, next month, December, well, I said this month, we're in it now. But December is a month where it's not like the schedule gets crazy hard for them, but there are going to be some games that are going to be measuring sticks for them. And those games are going to be really interesting to see how they respond.
Yeah. And I think one of the other things to point out defensively is season as a whole, all 19 games that they've played, they are 26th in terms in amount of possessions that are run in transition against them. So,
okay,
what is that? Fifth worst in the league, fourth worst in the league, somewhere around there. That they're giving up quite a few. So the inverse of it, 26th is in. They're giving up a higher percentage of them. You want to be first in that. And they're 27th in efficiency for the full season. But it just speaks to how off the rails things were for those, 5 games in October. When you just look at November, they're 29th in frequency of times opponents are getting in transition, so still not great, but they're 18th in efficiency. So right around league average, giving up a high volume of them. But again, part of that is we know with the makeup of this roster, it's probably going to be a thing. They also haven't rebounded particularly well, which is going to be a big piece of that. But they've done a better job of at least getting back and getting set defensively. So it really just shines a light on, man, how brutal was it for those 5 games in October? Because if you can be 18th, I think that's going to be good enough for this group, especially if the half-court defense plays like what we've seen for most of this season. If you can just be around league average, fine. It's when it's in the bottom 5 and worse, like we saw all of last year and parts of this season, that it's going to be a real problem.
Yeah, it really will. And let me ask you this too as we wrap up here, because the next game that we see the Bucks play is going to be against the Detroit Pistons. It's an NBA Cup game. Both the Pistons and the Bucks are 3-0 in group play. It's one of those games where like you win it, you win your group. You might have a chance at the wild card if you lose. But this is a Detroit team that's going to be playing, I think, with a lot of energy. Like this is a Detroit team that we've seen lose a lot last year. And they also have a certain history with the Milwaukee Bucks that's just ingrained to the franchise now over the last few years, where they just being a little bro by Milwaukee over and over and over again. This game on Tuesday for me is one of those ones where I think it might feel like a playoff atmosphere in Detroit.
I think it definitely will.
It's like, and the Bucks haven't been good on the road. So like, again, we're going to have so much more time to talk about this on tomorrow's show, but just thinking about that game, like, do you think this is going to be a measuring stick game on Tuesday for the Bucks, even though it's against a team like the Pistons, who some might look at and be like, well, that should be easy money, but just given the situation, like, you think that changes how you view the game?
I personally do. I think a lot of the outside perspective would be to laugh at that, but for all the reasons that you mentioned, I do. And even some of the similarities when you mentioned the little brother, I mean, that's basically what we saw from the Indiana Pacers last year. And what the Pistons last time they were in the playoffs was when the Bucks blew them off the floor in the first round. I know it's not a playoff game, but it's going to feel like a playoff game. And like Doc Rivers has said so many times too, look, why is doing well in the NBA Cup important to us? Because if there's a trophy to win, like we're all competitive. So if this is something we can win, we want to win it. And I mean that for teams like that too, like the Pistons, to say, hey, even if we don't make the playoffs this year, we got a chance to do this. And then maybe we can use that experience when we do get to the playoffs, hopefully in a year or so. So yeah, I do think it's going to be that is the atmosphere that this team is going to be walking into in Detroit on Tuesday night, tomorrow night. We'll preview that game in much more detail on tomorrow's show and all the scenarios, because you mentioned, look, even if you lose, you got a chance at the wild card. They have a good shot at the wild card, I think. If you keep it close, that's basically just don't lose by a lot, but it is going to depend on who wins that Knicks Magic game. So we'll get into those scenarios on tomorrow's show, and we'll have a better idea when the injury report is officially submitted too. Can we expect to see Chris Middleton make his return against his original team? And is that a boost that the Bucks will be getting here in Cup play? But to wrap it up, a very successful month for the Bucks in November. And you mentioned schedule. It's not as though it gets significantly more difficult in the month of December. You got 2 games as of this moment, 2 games against teams with winning records between now and I think it's January 8th. And those are the Cavs and Celtics. The rest of your opponents are basically like what the Bucks have gone through here in the month of November. So this is a golden opportunity for this team to continue to make their climb in the standings in what we've seen from this group. Granted, 2 of those games we don't know yet because of the NBA Cup. It could be you're in the knockout round and semifinals, and those are what's making up your schedule. It could be you're not in it and you got to make up the 1 home game and 1 road game. But just as I had this conversation with a few listeners on the radio on Saturday night, look, just because you don't qualify for the knockout round, that doesn't mean your schedule is easier and you get, okay, great, we get the lesser teams. The Celtics might not qualify, right? The Cavs did not qualify. The Knicks might not qualify. So you could have all of those teams available to fill out your schedule. And one last thing to point out here is, I know we're really starting to stretch it, Camille. I had to look at this several times to think there is no way this is right. And the ultimate caveat and asterisk to apply to this brief conversation is it is December 1st as you and I sit here and record this. So it is way too early to get into breaking down schedule. But as of this moment, the Bucks have the 23rd easiest remaining, or 23rd most difficult schedule in the league in terms of remaining opponent win percentage. Bucks are 23rd, Cavs are 24th, Celtics are 25th. And I'll do you one better there, Camille. Of the top, what is this, 12 teams? Only one is a Western Conference team. So the point being, yeah, the Eastern Conference has been that much of a mess that, hey, even though you haven't really had your brutal gauntlet yet, you got a lot of Eastern Conference games left. So you got an easy schedule.
You got a chance still. You got a chance to continue racking up some wins as we saw throughout the month of November over some of these other teams. But you're going to get some teams where, again, any night, anything can happen, like that Hawks team who has lost to the Wizards twice, but also has some big wins over teams that you wouldn't expect along the way. So, like, you got to have the proper level of respect because everyone is an NBA player. Anything can happen on any given night. You got to come out with the right focus, make sure you're executing. But again, we've talked about how difficult the Bucks schedule is, in March, April. So this is the time of the year where, as you're figuring things out, try to get those wins while you're also getting that learning process in.
Part of that is this, and that this is ultimately going to be, what determines how difficult the schedule is too. Those games later in the year, you got 3 games against Philly later in the year. You got your games with the Pelicans, and those are 2 teams that you thought that on paper was going to be a lot tougher than it is so far. And not to say that it's not going to turn around, but we'll know relatively soon if it's going to turn around for those teams or if this is just we're punting it and playing for next year. If that's the case, it's going to be a relatively easy schedule. If not, then unfortunately you didn't catch those teams when they were dealing with injuries and everything else, and you're going to have a full strength version of them in those matchups. Tomorrow, though, we will get into the NBA Cup and that matchup with the Detroit Pistons. The scenarios at play for the Bucks, I believe we have just one Eastern Conference team that's clinched. So there's 3 spots open and only 5 teams eligible to fill that. I mean, this is everything Adam Silver envisioned when he put this thing together. Not just that, and that it's coming down to the final night, but even the fact that, and I'm sure this will be met with criticism by some, but the fact that we could get the Orlando Magic, the Atlanta Hawks, the Detroit Pistons, and who knows, the Bucks, the Celtics as your 4th team, but that could be your group in the Eastern Conference. In the West, we've already got the Houston Rockets. You could get the Portland Trail Blazers, technically. So you could get all these types of teams emerging onto this scene that is the NBA Cup and just shining a light on different teams and different star players, which is one of the bigger motivations of this whole process.
It's one of the joys of it. Like the Pacers team last year, like no one really thought anything of them as they came into that tournament, and they used it as a springboard for the rest of their season. So I love how it gives random teams an opportunity to experience high stakes basketball, quote unquote, because you're playing for something else during those games. It's not just normal regular season game where it counts towards the standings, which is something, but you also have that financial incentive to continue to play well and also be like, hey, we won this competition, because to the point mentioned, these are competitors and they want to compete. So anytime you do that, you tend to get a good formula of some really great basketball. And I feel like all the cup nights have been that so far. So Tuesday should be one of those nights where even outside the Bucks game, just the basketball in general should be enjoyable because of the stakes these teams are playing for.
It should be a very, very interesting game tomorrow night in Detroit. And again, we'll preview that one at length on tomorrow's show. That will do it for today, though. And shouts to all the everydayers. A few of them I've met at Bucks games already. Just ran into another one Saturday night. So shouts to everybody out there on this journey with us. For Camille, I'm Justin. We will talk to you once again tomorrow on Locked On Bucks.